this way is because of that guy. And they won't change. And we're going to find out today a little bit why that is the majority decision people make. For some crazy, it's obvious on the surface, isn't it? How many of us find it easier to do the work of, okay, I'm going to forgive that person, or I'm not going to do the work and I'm just going to sit in my cesspool of unforgiveness, and it doesn't lead to anything other than, thank you, bondage. It doesn't lead to anything other than bondage. If you think it does, let me tell you, I've been a pastor for quite a few decades, and most of the people that I see have issues and problems in their psyche, in their behavior. And guess where they come from? Long-standing decisions to not take issue, not with others, but with themselves. Oh, we take issues with others. We're constantly pointing fingers, right? But how many of us are taking issue with this guy? If you take issue with this guy as God would mandate and in the way that he has directed, what happens? We make a covenant with God and he brings healing and restoration. If you don't, you lose friends, spouses, and worse, God. So, we've been looking at the book of Revelation. We went through, I think we got through the first trumpet last time, and we're learning that this book is describing a temple service. In fact, it's just describing the temple service on Friday. We won't get into the proof texts on all of that. We've already done that. Don't want to belabor it. But I do want to bring in a couple of things that I haven't mentioned in regards to that in the past. And it kind of supports this thesis that we've been talking about. At the end of the day, they would sing a song. A couple of songs, actually, one of which is the Song of Moses and the Song of Messiah, which we're going to learn is mentioned later on in the book of Revelation, that this crowd of worshipers up in heaven are singing. But they sing another song. They start off singing Psalms 93. Now, think in terms of metaphorical. In our metaphorical Friday service, which we've basically been saying, this brings to a culmination this age, and it introduces a new age, the 1,000-year reign, okay? If you think in terms of that, the book obviously is selling the idea that there's a crescendo building up. Crescendo of judgment on one hand, and a crescendo of there's a wedding about to happen, right? Both are crescendos. You want to attend the wedding, by the way. You don't want to be part of the other crescendo. This psalm is read towards the end of the day on Friday. So this song is sung at the end of this age, the age where we get a choice to decide whether we're going to hold on to our bondages, we're going to hold on to our unforgiveness, or we're going to let them go. We're going to forgive that person, or God. A lot of people hold grudges against God. God, I didn't deserve that. You probably heard it all. It's a waste of time, isn't it? So here's the Psalms. Psalms 93 goes like this. The Lord, okay, where are we? Right at the end of the, we're going to learn very quickly here in the next few trumpets that it's the seventh trumpet, the last trumpet. What happens at the last trumpet? God reigns. God reigns. That's the point of the seventh trumpet. At the seventh trumpet, it says, I forget where, it's in the New Testament, it talks about that's when God will come and reign. And it's further supported here in Revelation. It says here it goes. It says, the Lord reigns. The Lord reigns. Oh, that's just what I said was supposed to be happening. He is clothed with majesty. The Lord has clothed and encircled himself with strength. What's that referring to? He's clothed and enwrapped himself, surrounded himself with strength. Think in terms of a wedding. What would that represent? What happens to the groom during a wedding? He is enclosed by this tallit that's a gift from his bride, right? So you can, and a tallit, well, at least it's not me. And on this tallit that he's wrapping, it represents the authority of God. The tallits represent the authority of God, especially the tzitzit that are tied at each corner, like this one, tzitzit. So people would go into their prayer closet. In the New Testament, prayer closets are under your tallit. You're not hanging out with the shoes, and you would grab the tzitzit representing the authority of God. The widow, or not the widow, the woman with the issue of blood, she was grabbing for Yeshua's tzitzit. Unfortunately, it gets interpreted fringe, but she was grabbing towards these guys because it was recognized in those days that was where the authority of God resided. A little bit mystical, but nonetheless, representatively, that's what they represent, because they're knotted in a certain way that spells out his name, Yahweh, right? We talked about all of that. So this groom is wrapping himself in these clothes just before he's given pure linen white garments to his bride to wear, right? We're going to get to that, but it doesn't occur till, 19. And he encircles himself with strength and majesty. Indeed, the world is firmly established. It will not be moved. God metaphorically represents himself all throughout the scriptures as a rock, not a pebble, a rock. In fact, a better word would be a cornerstone. In ancient times, they would find the biggest, heaviest boulder, put it right at the corner of a building that they were going to construct, and try to design it in such a way so the bearing load would be on this cornerstone. Metaphorically, what's being sold here? Who's your cornerstone? What are you building on? Are you building on this rock? Yeshua is the rock. And his kingdom, when he sets it up, it won't be movable. It will be stable. Which, if we're supposed to be like him, the question that I ask myself when I hear myself say that is, how stable am I? How stable ask yourself that question. How stable are you? Not when you're eating cake, but when you're being challenged, roughed up, accused of something, difficult things. How stable are you then? Are you a nuclear bomb? Or are you going, well, let me process that. Maybe I need to apologize to somebody. Or maybe I need to control. You know what I'm getting at. How do you manage that? Lots of times, not so well. So over the course of time, what's our goal? We need to be able to go yesterday compared to today, last week compared to today, last year compared to today. I'm winning. Let me rephrase that. God is winning because I'm becoming more stable. I'm looking more and more like him. We don't have to conquer the world as you walk out the door today. You just have to pick one thing out and go, that needs to go. It doesn't go away by having a good night's sleep. It's not accidental. Improvements are made. Remember, life is a struggle upstream. Downstream is the easy road. That's where the majority go. But upstream goes against natural law and biblical law, which we'll get into a little bit maybe. So it's also interesting that on the next day of the week, Saturday, the 7th, they would, and we'll get more into this as we get to the representations of Shabbat in the book of Revelation, but we're not there yet. But I do want to bring this out. They would sing Psalms 92. And Psalms 92, now think about it. Okay, God's come back. He's set up his kingdom. And the scene actually is in Revelation. We'll get to it. The scene actually is a whole congregation of people before the throne, and they're singing songs. Now, what would you be singing? This song speaks about thanking God, singing, being joyful for what he has done for us, right? We're now immortal. We don't deserve it, but he saved us. And we now have life forever. Right? Like right now, we do not have life forever. But we will. How many of us are dying? Yeah, everybody's dying. You get one of those per turn. But we have the hope. It's called the Gospels, which means the hope, the good news. We have the good news, and our faith rests on the promises of God that, yeah, we all get one swing at life. But if we believe and repent, then God will save us from ourselves, actually. So, let's start with, I know we've covered partially Trump 1, but I'd like to cover a few more issues with it. Starting in verse 6, it says, let's see, is this one? Yeah, we'll do Trump 1 here. And the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Okay, all the incense burning has happened. These trumpets have been handed out to seven angels, and it's all part of the Friday service. We've done all of that. We won't belabor it. But all of that's done. All the incense burning that represents the prayers of the saints is all done. Now these angels are about to blow, and there's these judgments. Let me say something about what's about to fall. These are not statistically probable events. We're going to get into that, a little bit of math today, which I know a lot of you are just going, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, my favorite thing. There might be one or two of you that are going that way. The rest of you are going, oh my gosh, John. Anyway, these are not statistically probable. These are impossibly improbable events which actually supports the case that the end time is, when you learn something about statistics, what you learn is that when a lot of improbable things occur, like raising from the dead, it's probably not natural. It's probably miraculous or caused by spiritual intent. We'll just leave it at that for the moment. So anyway, we have Trump 1, verse 6. Now verse 7, the first angel was blowing his trumpet, and there was hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled to the earth, and a third of the earth was burnt up, and a third of the trees was burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. Sounds like Canada right now. You know the fires in Canada? If you count up all the acreage, it's bigger than the country of Great Britain. That's a big area. You look at the map of Canada. The map of Canada is not drawn proportionally, right? Because it's trying to be you know anything about circles, they have to fill in a lot more land. So if you would put Great Britain on top of the map of Canada, it would consume a large portion of their northern forests. I don't know whether if those fires are a partial fulfillment of that, but we got a ways to go because Great Britain is not 1/3 of the forests. But nonetheless, this does not look like good news. We're going to learn that as these judgments continue to peel off here, things that sound like asteroids, things that sound like drought and war and famine and all of these specific things that are being described, like grass and trees burned up, they come right out of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Leviticus is the full description of the blessings if you follow my rules, and the curses if you don't. Read it. It's chapter 16, I think. I took a look at the Levitical curses, and you can actually cut them up into 6 groups. If you're interested, you can. This is where you find them. It's in Leviticus 26. It's verse 14, 18, 21, 24, 28, and 35. There's 6 of them there. How many, these, if you still have your hand out of that compound of menorah that I handed out a couple of months ago when we started this study on the book of Revelation, you've got 7 little mini menorah events that are occurring in the book of Revelation. How many of them are known? 6. There's one that's hidden. We're going to get to that. It's in chapter 10. Some very interesting things that we'll get to. But for right now, it's hidden. It's not allowed to be known. God is hiding the thunder voices. Leviticus follows suit and describes 6 groups of curses. The book of Revelation describes 6 groups of curses. Is that just accidental? Maybe, but probably not. There's another parallel here as we start these 7 trumpets. What other parallel? Now think. In the Old Testament, the recordation of history, when Israel came into the promised land, there's another parallel of 7 trumpets. Come on, you guys are good. What is it? It's right at the beginning of when they went into the land of promise. How many times did they go around Jericho before the walls fell down? 7 times. And what did they do? They blew trumpets, right? And each time, I think what was going on was there was 2 camps of hearts. The camp inside the city that were shaking in their boots, is they knew judgment was about to fall. Little did they know. And this is all recorded in archaeological discoveries. Then there was another group of hearts. The Israelites were gung-ho, very positive, strong belief. They certainly had improved over the previous generation, hadn't they? But they were still had a long way. How many of us have a long way to go in our walk with God, in our confidence, and our reliability with his will for us? Yeah. Most of us have a ways to go, but we should be getting better every day, right? The Israelites, they're walking around, they're thinking of a sweaty, bloody battle where they're going to lose many people climbing up these walls. Let me tell you, these walls it was a 2-wall system like this. One wall down here, and then there was a ramp. It was a moat at first. Then there was a wall, a ramp, and then another wall. And you've got to get over the moat, get up the first wall, up the ramp, and up the second wall. And they're thinking, oh my gosh, I hope Joshua really knows what he's doing here. But what are they doing? They're not asked to do anything other than go for a walk each day. That might take an hour. It's like, and then the walls fall down on day 7. And then what are they told to do? All of these things that you find here are not for you. They should be, they're holy unto God. Jericho's like a tithe. You get the rest of the kingdom. But the first and the best goes to God. That's the imagery here. And it all happens on feasts that speak the same message. We won't get into that. What does it do, though? The walls of Jericho fall down. And Jericho was geographically placed. From the east, the doorway into the promised land was through Jericho. So from Jordan, if you wanted to get into the promised land, you had to go through Jericho. So those walls falling down in such a miraculous way opened the door to the most bountiful blessing than they could not even imagine. The same with these trumpets in the book of Revelation. Yeah, it looks like all hell is breaking loose. Because let me tell you, as we get to these, we're only get to the first 4. The last 3 are called woes. And you're going, wait a minute, the first 4, those were woes. No, they're not called woes. But it's going to sound like woes. In fact, the seals, they didn't sound much fun either. So there's an escalation. The drum beats are getting closer and closer together. We're almost at the judgment day. Or, for those that are willing to forgive, we're almost at the wedding. What are you hoping for? Watch as these trumpets are blown. We're going to see a message that's spoken by God to the world, just like there was a message spoken to Jericho and the Israelites on that fateful spring feast time, which is when they went across Jordan. We've got a lot of competition today. So we can find these parallels in Leviticus 16 and Deuteronomy 28, the last half 28 and 29. Moses, when he's writing that book, he's given a synopsis of the law and the blessings and the curses. It's much more compact, but that's what the focus of Deuteronomy is. He's writing that book on the ancient site of Sodom, just before they cross over the Jordan River. He's writing Deuteronomy before he goes up and God takes him home. God kills him up in the Jordanian mountains. And he's writing this book as a final message to the people that he's been with for 40 some odd years. And so is the book of Revelation. It's a book written by God to people that he's been with for 6,000 years and all those that are alive. He's telling those people that are alive, which I believe are the people today, you got two choices. You can hold your unforgiveness or you can forgive. Your choice. You can get right or you can get wrong. You're already wrong, but so this first trumpet, of course, is not a standalone judgment. John just didn't come up with something new. If this is actually a fulfillment, which I believe it is, of the blessings and the curses in Leviticus, then they should be the same, right? Well, guess what? They are. If you want to read what these trumpets mean, all you have to do is look in Leviticus. If you want to read what the thunders, if you want to read what the angelic proclamations, the bowls, all these other things that are poured out on the earth, all you have to do is read Leviticus 16. It amplifies what we're learning here. Revelation just puts it in an order. So I've got umpteen verses. Leviticus 26:20, grain and fruit will not be produced. They'll be all burnt up. Deuteronomy 28:1-14 is the blessings. And then if you read 15 on, you'll see all of these things we're about to read here in the book of Revelation, all of these judgments that are going to fall. Joel, let me read that. We've got forests burning up, grasslands burning up, and then we will learn that the book of Joel, I haven't referred to it much yet because it doesn't arrive till we get to the sixth trumpet. Joel, the entire book, is an end-time prophecy, and it amplifies the half of a chapter that is described in Revelation chapter 9 in regards to the sixth trumpet. They're beautiful overlays, okay? When we get there, I'll amplify that more, but here we are approaching that we're just almost at this devastating woe that's about to happen. And Joel, at the very beginning of the book, I think he's got 4 or 5 chapters. In chapter 1:15, it says, woe for the day. Now, remember, this is an end time context. It says, for the day of the Lord is near. How many live that way? Or, pass the popcorn. And it will come as destruction from the Almighty. Has food not been cut off before our eyes? What is grain? What type of plant is it? Very good. And what got just burnt up? The grass. Has food not been cut off before our eyes, and joy and rejoicing from the house of God? We'll get more into that when we get down there. The seeds have dried up under their shovels. The storehouses have become desolate. The grain silos are ruined because the grain has dried up. How the animals have groaned, the herds of cattle have wandered aimlessly because there is no pasture for them. Even the flocks of sheep have suffered. Why are they calling out the flocks of sheep? It sounds like they're, sheep, when they graze, they pull the entire plant up out of the ground, where cows just crop the top. To you, Yahweh, I cry out. So here's the resolution. Here's how you escape this day. Revelation says the same thing. We're going to get to there at the end of the sixth trumpet. It's going to say the same thing, except in the negative. They're not crying out in the book of Revelation. Here, to you, Lord, I cry out, for fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness, and the flame has burned up all the trees of the field. Even the animals of the field pant for you, for the stream beds of water are dried up, and fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness. It's an overlay, isn't it? It talks about the same thing. And Joel is just a prophecy about the curses in Leviticus 16. It just expands on, that's the beauty of these Old Testament prophets, because they prophesied about prophesied about end time events that came out of older proclamations in Torah, but also the New Testament piles on, and especially the book of Revelation, it puts all of this crazy mixture of prophecies in the Old Testament, it puts them in order. So you can see, oh, this follows this follows this. Or if you read the Old Testament, how does all this, there's multiple wars that are going to happen. How do you organize them? It's hard to figure out, unless you have the book of Revelation. That's the beauty of this book. I'm going to deviate a little bit here before we get to Trump 2 and talk about some interesting statistical pieces of information that I think embellish and make a strong point. God created statistics, don't you know? Right? He created math. He created physics. So you can find him in math. You can find him in physical laws. Because he is not the law. He's the law giver, right? So just for fun, there's scientists, when they study certain human behavior, human physical phenomena, natural phenomena like storms, severity of storms, etc., they find that these kind of things fall into two kind of data distribution types. The first one is a bell curve. You're all familiar with the bell curve, right? If you'll put the bell curve up there. That's not the bell curve. Incoming. The bell curve is interesting. You know, the typical example of the bell curve is dice. How many have ever thrown two dice? And you'll find that if you're trying to throw a 12, it's not nearly as likely to come up as a 7. And a 7 is going to come up way more than a 4 or an 8, right? Because there's more chances statistically by the numbers on the dice that the numbers around 7 are more likely to come up rather than 2 and 12, right? Well, if you throw it 1,000,000 times or even 100 times, you'll find that it'll form a bell curve. The amount of 2s and 12s and the amount of 7s, and then down the slope, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 will form this bell curve, okay? So the center of which is the most common probability of this event occurring. So a very weak storm would fall into the very peak of the bell curve. It's going to happen all the time. And they do. We're going to have a very weak storm arrive probably Monday. Now, it's caused by the hurricane Hillary coming in from the south, but that's an aside. But it's not, potentially, it's not going to be very strong. Who knows? But potentially up here, it won't be very strong. And we get these monsoonal flows that happen every summer, and they're not very strong. We don't get we don't get tornadoes like they do in Missouri or Nebraska, right? But here we get these weak little things. But when we get a big storm, it's very unlikely. So if you count up all of our very severe storms and the amount compared to the very weak storms, they also form a bell curve. So if you've got a very strong storm, people will call that deviations from the norm. So the first deviation you can see has a 68% chance, right? They happen all the time. Most of the storms we get are not very severe, and they happen 68% of the time, right? Then the other two types, a little more severe storms, they happen around 27, 28% of the time. Okay, so about 1/4 of the storms are a little more severe. And then the third deviation is really bad storms. I've lived up here for almost 30 years, and I don't know if we've even had one of these, because they usually are 200-year storms, 500-year storms. And so I'd need to live a few more decades to see one of those. But they have less than 1%. They have about a 0.2, depending on circumstances, but usually plus or minus 1% chance. So in 100 years, you're going to have 1 year where you have one of these super terrible storms. Some things that are measured or the data collected about these types of events fall into a bell curve. They're bell curve distribution things are like human height. If you measure all the humans, or just take 1,000 humans, they will form a bell curve, the height of them. So all the people, males would cluster around 5, 9, or 10, right? That would be very common. But if you're 7'5", you would be way out on the tail of this thing, right? Or if you're 4'5", you'd be on the other tail of this. Not very common, right? Same if you're female, it's just going to drop down a few inches from the norm, right? Birth weight follows a bell curve distribution. Reading ability follows a bell curve. How many of us are in the tails of, not the bad tail, but the good tail? SAT scores. Very interesting is IQs fall into a bell curve. So if you have 100, you measure 100 on an IQ test, you're right down the middle, okay? If you're a 115 or you're on that first deviation line, okay, on the left. If you have 85, you're on the right deviation line. 85 is lower IQ, right? So there's a 30% on each side fall into 100 to 115, has about, 34%. From 100 to 85, have about 34%. So right around the middle, there's 68+% of people have a score that's real close to the middle. It's interesting to note that from 115 to 130, the next 15 points on either side don't have 68%. Their total combination is around 27%, 13 plus on either side of the middle, okay? And then if you're lucky enough to have an IQ over 130, so like 135, you're like in the 2, 3, 4 percentile. And it goes on from there. If you're over 170, then you're a weirdo. I don't know. Now it's interesting. Now this kind of this statistic is interesting because you can see the hand of God. The Hebrews, especially the Ashkenazi Hebrews, which is a fancy name for the European Jewry, has an average IQ of 115. So the average person starts at the percentile that most of us would start at 100. So the tails is where all the action is, right? You know what I mean by the tails of bell curve? That's where all the geniuses or very low IQ people reside, okay? So if your average is 15 points better than the world average, guess who resides way out on the high tail over here of bell curve? There's a reason why most of the Nobel Prizes are won by Hebrew people. They have an advantage. Why is that? Because they're special? No, it's because God, you can read it in the Old Testament. God blessed them in spite of themselves. God blesses you in spite of ourselves. The lesson here is make the most with what you've been given, because you have all been given something. We all have an advantage. Now that we're believers, we're all canted over to the left side of this bell curve. And I'm not talking just about IQ. I'm talking about every attribute that is good and holy. You've got an advantage. Sell it. Make it so. The other distribution is a Prater distribution. If you can put that up. It's called the 80-20% rule. And some of you people that are business owners or managers are aware of this distribution. Not all phenomena occur under a bell curve. It's weird. God created two different types of ways to describe natural occurring events. This is the Prater. It's 80-20 rule. So what it says is, let me give you some examples. 80% of the criminals, I'm sorry, I have this wrong. 20% of the criminals commit 80% of the crimes. 20% of the car drivers, none of us here, cause 80% of the accidents. Really? I thought they were just random. No. There's certain people that drive crazy. They drive unholy. 20% of companies produce, their products represent 80% of the sales. One that I don't have on this list that just came up in my mind is, how does it go? 20% of the population controls 80% of the wealth. And then if you take a look at that 20% that remain, that have 80% of the wealth, it's also Pareto. So the final 20 is 20% of those guys have 80% of the remaining wealth. And then it keeps going. 20% of those guys. That's why there's 5 or 6 people in the world that control, I'm exaggerating, very few people control billions, trillions of dollars. It's just following a Pareto curve. Now, am I saying that all these people procured their wealth in a holy fashion? No, but that's a whole nother topic. 20% of the students have scores that are 80% or higher. Well, I see where I fall. 20% of the employee, now this is a real rub. This is where business owners need to really think. 20% of the employees are responsible for 80% of the results. Whoa. 20% of the employees, so you got 100 employees, 20 of them produce 80% of the results. So just get rid of the rest of the 80. Well, no, they still produce stuff. It's hard to find that they're 1 in 20. And it gets worse because of those 20 employees, Pareto again works. If you take a look at the top 20 producers that are producing 80% of the productivity, they Pareto. So 20% of those guys, what is that, 4? I was not a good master, so I think it's 4 people. 4 people do 80% of the 80%. 8 times 8, 64. 64% of the productivity is done by 4 lousy people. They're really not lousy. They're wonderful people, but everybody else is jealous of them. No, I don't. What does that say about us, about mankind? You know, in Matthew 22, it says, many are called, but most are chosen. No. I think what's going on there is Pareto. It's a Pareto manifestation of what God knew about us. Most choose not. Most choose to, I think, everybody could be in a 20%. But it's human nature. It's a sin nature that gets us to, I know break is a half hour, but no one's going to know if I take an extra 5 minutes. Where the 20%, they don't even take a break. They're the guys that are breaking the laws because you have to take a break. All of us can be in that 20%. I've run many businesses in my life. And I remember I like to hire young people. I was probably 28 at the time, so I wasn't very old. But I really like to give people an advantage or a chance to prove themselves. So here's what I would do. I would hire like 10 young men. And I was a builder, so there's tons of cleanup, to digging, shovel, not fun work, right? Hard work. And at the end of the day, there might be one that I would want to keep. There might be another 1 or 2 that maybe had potential that I could maybe work with. All the rest, they were dangerous. They were going to hurt themselves. All you builders and contractors know what I'm talking about. Most of the people you hire, you learn very quickly, you're going to kill yourself with that pick. Or you would walk around a corner. I hire kids to mow my lawn. So from time to time, I go out to find what they're doing because I'm not hearing any noise, right? So I come around a corner and here's this kid just leaning against the house. And I'm going, am I required to give him a break for 3 hours worth of work? I don't think so. But, and then of course, immediately he gets to work. I'm going, okay, there's an 80%er. Back to Matthew 22, there are many called, few are chosen. God is not being mean. He's not being prejudiced because he doesn't choose one. They were nicer to me, so I'm going to choose it. He's very fair, isn't he? And what rules does he choose by? Is he finding you leaning against the house? Is he finding you, no one's gonna know. Plus, I've worked hard. I'm gonna take 35 minutes for Pete's sake. Are we finding reasons in our life to be the 80%? Average. Or are we finding ourselves to be at the perimeter of the belt, exceptional? These words, many are called. It means to be called. It means to be invited. Chosen means to be picked out, chosen. It means to be the elect. It's the typical word you see in the New Testament for elect. It's this word. It also means to be excellent. And I'm looking for a kid that he's going the extra mile. He's not leaning against the house. The Hebrew word, those were Greek words. The Hebrew word it's bachor. And it means elect, chosen, but it also means, with a little different vowels, it means to be a young virgin male. What? So called from its beautiful form. Now, I don't think God was referring, when he uses this word, to exclude people that we would think not being beautiful on the outside. This is wholly an analysis of your spirit, your soul, how you've managed your life. Are you beautiful? I'm not talking about warts. I'm talking about actions that are warts. Or no, you've gotten rid of the warts. Those that are chosen are beautiful in God's eyes, in spirit and in truth. Virgins speak of what? Purity, holiness, right? It's like the bride, right? Where do you fall? Almost out of time. How'd that happen? Hold on, let me see what I can get done here. Yeah, let me do Trump too. Let me read it. The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was hurled into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. And a third of the creatures which were in the sea and had life, a nephesh, died. And a third of the ships were destroyed. I'm not a fan of turning everything in the book of Revelation into a metaphor. Sometimes it's very clear. We're going to see in one of the next trumpets this beast come out of the abyss. It's a metaphor about some entity we're going to learn who is. There's locusts that come out of this. It's a metaphor for very clear. God in the Old Testament has told us what these locusts metaphorically represent. I don't think this is a metaphor. I think that something is going to happen. Something like a mountain burning with fire is hurled into the... What could that possibly mean? Asteroid, that's the obvious thing that comes to mind. Who knows? I don't know. The text, if you look up all these words, I've looked them up many times to see if I can get more insight. It's a star. Some people want to go, oh, no, it's an angel. Well, how big of a splash is an angel going to make? Mountain, I can tell you that's going to be a big splash. Ships are going to be destroyed. A third of the life in the sea, in the oceans, are going to die. Think about that. What is one of the most important sources of food in the world today? The oceans, right? Because we harvest fish from them all over the world. This is a very important, some nations more important than others, but this is a very important source of food for humans. including other wildlife. 1/3 of it's going to be think about the consequences here. This is not minor. Oh, shoot, no more salmon. Yeah, 1/3 of the ships. That means no more plastic dinosaurs from China or in all the other products they sell us. That's trouble. Think about the lack or the destruction of economic activity. 1/3 of anything economically is huge. Not a good place to be during these times. And have anybody found a rapture yet? No rapture yet. It's still to come. Oh, it's coming. We're getting closer, but we're still some trumpets away. And the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch. And it fell on the third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The star is named Wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the waters because they were made bitter. This is brand new. Now, bitterness is all over the Old Testament. We're running out of time. I've got a whole page on stuff that we can learn about bitterness. This word wormwood is one of many, not many, but a few words that mean bitterness. If you look up some of these passages that refer to bitterness in the Old Testament, you'll find that it's a judgment that God pours out on mankind for certain specific kinds of sin. Idol worship. We don't worship idols. What's a 21st century definition of an idol? Oh, money. Money's evil. No. But when you worship anything that isn't God, it becomes evil for you. What else? Movies. Food. Let's not go there, Jerry. Those chips, they're awful good, you know. Anything else? TV, movies. Oh, what's the new age God? Is self. We can become master. That's the lie, isn't it? From the beginning, you can be like gods. Remember Satan in the garden? What did he whisper to Eve? Don't listen to him, God. You can be something like him, but not without it. Knowledge with him makes you great in the kingdom of God. Knowledge without God makes you proud and ultimately leads to your destruction. So this bitterness, yep, idol worship, anything you put before God falls into that category. And man has been doing this for 6,000 years, putting things before God. This idea of poisoning the fresh waters, what does that speak of Hebraically? What is life? Absolutely. God is metaphorically represented as living water, right? So why is he representative of living water? Water is the source of life, and you can have dead water, can't you? That's why when we mikvah, it has to be alive water, which is metaphorically represented by flowing water, right? So we bow to the Creator in living, flowing water, right? So he's living water. So what's being destroyed here? living water. We're going to see in the next trumpet, which we won't get to, it's going to get dark. And dark is a metaphor for deception. The removal of living water is a metaphor for the removal of God in our society. That's not happening, thank goodness. This word wormwood is used a few places in the Old Testament. It's la'ana, means bitterness. We've got more information about this in our book, but let me just say this in regards to wormwood. It was a representation of a poison that you could take a little bit of and it would actually have some healing qualities. But if you took too much, it'd kill you. And in Numbers 5:17, so you don't have time, it talks about poisonous waters being taken as a test. The test is, in Numbers, it says Torah, is a husband that's suspicious of his wife, that she's been sleeping around on him. So the instruction is in Torah is take your wife, take him to the high priest, and he will give her this bitter water to drink. And if she's innocent, then nothing happens to her. And he has to take the poison. No. He can't divorce her ever again. He has to love her, adore her, and take care of her, which is a tall order because he's already suspect, because he's suspicious of her for being innocent, right? But if she's guilty, the text, what does it say? It's kind of gross. It talks about her belly swells, her thighs shrivel. I'm not sure what that means. And she dies. So whatever all of that means, it's not good. That's exactly what's going on here. At the end of time, if you haven't picked up by now that the book of Revelation is all about a relationship or one that doesn't exist. God is testing you and me right now. And he's going, well, let's see if your belly's going to swell or no. And I'm not talking about pregnancy, and I'm not talking about women. How are you going to measure up? This whole set of judgments is being poured out. What did these judgments, the trumpet judgments, start off way back in chapter 7? How does that start? There's 4 angels that are going to hold back the wind, but they're not allowed to do it. And the lack of wind, we learned in the Old Testament, was a sign of judgment, okay? They're about to hold back the wind, but an angel comes. And we talked about this angel, he's Messiah. He comes and he says, no, don't do that. Don't hurt the trees and this and that until I mark these 144,000. Now, this marking is a tav. We learned some stuff about all of that. We'll get into that. But who else is marked? Not now, but in the past. In the past, as of when these are events about to be poured out. Who else has been marked? Thank you. Who said that? Very good, Johnny. Believers. If you're a believer, you're marked. And we looked up passages that prove the case. God marks all those that believe in him. Multiple places. And the word is consistent. It's ot. It's a tav. They would mark with a cross, right? Which is the ancient form of the letter tav, right? You know, put your mark at the X. Well, that comes from very ancient moorings, Hebrew moorings. You're making a covenant when you believe in God and put your mark and sign your name next to the X, right? Before any of these disasters are poured out in the trumpets, God has marked most of us before, but a special group get marked out. And it's amplified. You want to know more about this marking? Read Isaiah 9 and 10. It's an amplification of this marking in 7. It's Israel-centric, because all the Old Testament prophets, most of them are. Revelation is worldwide centric, okay? But there's a marking going on in our day. And in many senses of the word, it's the last marking. And God's marking you and others, not randomly, but by your own choice. And I'm not just talking about salvation. These 144,000, they were picked out for a specific job. You're picked out for a specific job. You're going to do it? Thank you, Johnny. You're the 20%. I think we all can be. We do it not by genetic advantage. We do it by choice. We choose to be the 20%, or we can choose to be the 80%. You know, we were singing that song, what was the, I wrote it down, you know, about getting in the river. In the river, yeah, kind of cool. And I'm going, oh, wow, that's kind of a neat song. I really like that song. Got to play it again, whoever's in charge. And I'm going, the 20% are in the river. Where are the 80%? Well, they're standing on the side going, gee, I've got all my toys, water toys, but it's cold. I don't want to get in the river and have fun, because I know down there could be a waterfall. So I want to stay safe. I don't want to gamble. I don't want to take a chance on this thing called God, or maybe I've already got my ticket into heaven. I'm a believer. But, you know, I'm really comfortable right where I'm at. I like my chips, and I'm good. And, you know, remember, the 20% also Prados into this 80-20. And that 20 Prados into the next 80-20. Where are you? Where are we as a congregation? Where are we individually? Are we just looking at where we are and making decisions based on, this is my comfort level with that, John? Or are we making decisions based on, well, forget my comfort. What is God asking me to do? Because if you ask yourself that and then you do it, you're a 20%er. And I think we all can be 20%er. Let's make it a goal to be the 20%. In fact, let's be 20% of the 20% of the 20%, which is like 4 guys. Jerry.
Fight the good fight. Fight the good fight.
Fight the good fight. And that fight is rarely defensive. It's mostly offensive. In other words, in your own life, you're always moving forward. It's not backing up. That's not the kingdom of God. It's light moves forward at 186,000 miles per second. That's pretty fast. How fast are we going? You want to be at 20%? How many want to join me with that? Let's rise for the Aaronic blessing. The Lord, excuse me, the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his face upon you and give you peace. Amen. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat. Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom. Hey, join me with the prayer over the bread. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam ha'motzi lehem min ha'aretz. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Shabbat shalom. Have a wonderful Shabbat.